Have you ever felt a desire so consuming that it frightened you? Not the surface kind, not attraction or want, but the kind that feels like a storm in the blood, something older than your name, more powerful than your will. Most of us are taught to run from it. From a young age, we learn to label such intensity as dangerous, unholy, or shameful. Society tells us that lust corrupts, that to feel it deeply is to lose control, that purity means suppression. But Carl Jung saw something the moralists missed. To Jung, lust was never the enemy of the soul. It was its engine, its spark, its most primal expression of the divine will to live. He called it eros, not simply sexual energy, but the psychic glue that binds the world together. It is the yearning of every atom for unity, the invisible thread that pulls us toward what we lack, what we fear, what we secretly ache to become. Lust, Jung wrote, is the shadowed face of love. And to reject it entirely is to cut off the lifeblood of creation itself. But here's the paradox. When we repress this energy, when we bury it beneath guilt and control, it doesn't vanish. It retreats into the unconscious, growing more primitive, more distorted. It begins to rule us from the shadows, through obsession, manipulation, fantasy, and pain. What you repress, Jung warned, controls you from beneath. And so the battle begins, not between good and evil, but between consciousness and instinct. Every human being carries this fire within them, a tension between the sacred and the carnal, between heaven and the underworld. The question is never how to extinguish it, it's how to hold it without being consumed. This is where Jung's fascination with alchemy began. He saw in the ancient alchemists' work a metaphor for the soul's transformation. They sought to turn base metals into gold, not through chemistry but through spirit. For Jung, lust was the base metal, crude, powerful, full of potential, and through self-awareness, it could be refined into something luminous. Love, creativity, spiritual power. The medieval mystics spoke of the same truth in different language. The Sufi poets called it ishq, divine longing. The Gnostics saw it as the tension that awakens consciousness. Even the Christian mystics spoke of an erotic union with the divine, not of flesh but of flame. In every tradition, the message is the same. Desire is not your downfall. It is your invitation. When a person begins to awaken spiritually, one of the first signs is that desire intensifies. Everything starts to shimmer with hidden meaning. Encounters that once felt ordinary now feel charged with significance. That's because the soul is trying to communicate, using the only language powerful enough to get your attention, eros. And this is the secret Jung uncovered. The goal is not to destroy desire, but to transmute it. To take that raw, untamed energy and refine it, not through denial, but through awareness. To see that the object of your lust was never the point, it was the mirror. The real journey begins when you stop chasing the image and start listening to the energy beneath it. That is the beginning of alchemy, the point where flesh and spirit stop fighting and start conversing, where lust becomes love and love becomes light. Tonight we'll enter this hidden laboratory of the soul, where desire is not shunned but sanctified. We'll trace the 7 transformations of lust, from its first spark in the body to its final ascent into awareness, because the alchemist does not fear the fire. He steps into it, and only by doing so does he discover what Jung called the inner gold, the self that burns but is never consumed. Segment 1: The Nature of Lust, the Fire Beneath the Psyche. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And nowhere is that more true than in our relationship with desire. When Jung spoke of eros, he wasn't merely speaking of sexuality. He was describing a psychic principle, a force that shapes how we relate to the world itself. Lust, in this deeper sense, is the expression of life reaching for life, the creative impulse that builds civilizations, writes symphonies, paints masterpieces, and gives birth to human connection. At its purest level, lust is energy, raw, primal, divine. But because it is so powerful, it terrifies us. It reminds us that we are not as rational, not as civilized, not as in control as we pretend to be. It pulls us into the body, into instinct, into hunger. And yet, this is precisely where the soul begins to awaken. In the Red Book, Jung described his visions of descending into the depths of his own unconscious. There, he encountered figures of great temptation, images of sensuality, passion, and chaos. But he did not flee from them. He understood that the only way to reach wholeness was to meet those forces, to give them voice, to integrate them. He called this shadow work, and within the shadow, lust is one of the most potent energies we can face. Because lust is not just sexual craving. It is the psyche's cry for union, the yearning to dissolve the illusion of separation, to touch the eternal through the fleeting. Every time we lust after something, a person, a vision, an ideal, we are actually reaching for something within ourselves that we have forgotten or disowned. That is why lust so often feels sacred and sinful at the same time. It exposes the split inside us, the war between instinct and ideal, body and spirit. And this conflict, Jung observed, is not a flaw to be erased, but a path to be walked. He wrote, "The tension of opposites is the source of all growth. If you repress desire, it sinks into the unconscious, where it festers and turns toxic. If you indulge it blindly, it consumes you. The path of individuation, of becoming whole, lies between those extremes. Learning to hold the tension, to let the fire burn, without running from it or being devoured by it. When we understand this, lust stops being a moral problem and becomes a psychological revelation. It shows us where we are divided, where our energy is trapped, where our unlived life still waits. Think of the artist obsessed with a muse, the scientist obsessed with discovery, the mystic obsessed with God. All of them are moved by the same current, eros, channeled through different forms. The energy that once burned as lust can be sublimated, redirected into creativity, compassion, and insight. But that transformation does not come from repression. It comes from awareness. Jung often spoke about holding the opposites, the ability to stay conscious in the presence of both light and shadow. Lust becomes dangerous only when it is unconscious, when it possesses us instead of us possessing it. When you bring awareness to it, when you watch it without shame, feel it without judgment, something extraordinary happens. It begins to change its nature. What was once chaotic becomes creative. What was once carnal becomes symbolic. The same energy that pulls us downward can, when seen clearly, lift us upward. This is why Jung saw lust as a gateway to spiritual growth, not because it should be glorified, but because it cannot be ignored. Whatever you repress becomes your God in disguise. Whatever you avoid meeting within yourself will return to you, over and over, wearing new faces. And so, lust becomes the first initiation, the first element in the alchemist's fire. To face it is to step into the furnace of transformation. To deny it is to remain forever a victim of what you refuse to understand. Jung once compared this process to a chemical reaction. When two substances meet, sulfur and mercury, fire and flesh, something must burn before gold can form. The soul's alchemy works the same way. You must confront the intensity of your own desire, not as sin, but as signal. It is the psyche saying, there is life here. There is something you have not yet integrated. So the next time desire rises like a wave, don't rush to tame it, and don't rush to drown in it. Sit with it. Feel the pulse beneath the urge. Ask yourself what it is truly asking for. Because beneath the craving for another lies a deeper calling, the longing to return to yourself. And that, Jung said, is where all transformation begins. Segment 2. The Shadow of Desire. When lust turns dark. Every fire that can illuminate can also destroy. And in the human psyche, lust, when denied understanding, becomes the most destructive fire of all. Carl Jung warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. He knew that desire, in its unconscious form, has a tendency to possess. When we repress it, it doesn't vanish. It goes underground. It gathers force in the depths, feeding on our denial until it emerges in distorted ways, through addiction, obsession, domination, or self-hatred. To Jung, this was not sin in a theological sense. It was psychic imbalance. It was the result of cutting off one of life's most potent energies from the light of awareness. When lust becomes shadow, it seeks not union, but control. It no longer desires connection, it craves possession. It no longer longs for wholeness, it seeks conquest. This is when relationships become toxic, when attraction turns into obsession, when love curdles into dependency or rage. The shadow of desire disguises itself as love but operates through fear, the fear of loss, rejection, inadequacy. Jung saw this pattern clearly in his work with patients. He noticed that many people who appeared outwardly moral or restrained often had the most turbulent unconscious lives. Their dreams, fantasies, and projections were saturated with repressed passion. They had built walls so high that the energy behind them became volcanic. One of Jung's most famous insights was that what we do not live out consciously, we live out unconsciously, and it often comes to us in the form of fate. That is why so many people find themselves repeating the same destructive patterns in relationship. They fall for the same type of person, experience the same betrayals, feel the same emptiness, over and over, until they finally realize that the problem was never out there. The shadow was within. When we repress lust, it becomes projected onto others. We see in another person what we have buried in ourselves, our vitality, our power, our capacity for passion. This is why infatuation feels like madness. We are not falling in love with the person before us, we are falling in love with a lost part of our own soul that they mirror back. But if we fail to see this, desire becomes consumption. We try to merge with the image, to own it, to consume it, because unconsciously we are trying to reclaim the energy we disowned. This is how lust turns into its shadow form, addiction to illusion. The lover who can't let go. The artist who confuses obsession with inspiration. The seeker who uses spirituality to bypass their own wound. Each is trapped by the same mistake, confusing the symbol for the source. Jung often said that the gods have become diseases. By this, he meant that the great forces that once lived in the realm of myth, Eros, Dionysus, Aphrodite, now live in the unconscious, acting out through human neuroses and compulsions. The modern man, he said, no longer worships his gods, he suffers them. In ancient times, the erotic was sacred. Desire was not hidden. It was ritualized, given space in temples, celebrated in myth. The Greeks understood that to honor Eros was to recognize a divine energy that could destroy or redeem, depending on how it was approached. But when modernity exiled the sacred from the sensual, desire lost its context. We tried to moralize it, control it, sterilize it, and in doing so we made it dangerous. We created a society that is both obsessed with sex and terrified of it, both repressed and addicted. Jung saw this psychic contradiction as one of the defining pathologies of the modern world. He wrote that we have forgotten how to stand in the presence of the sacred, and lust, more than any other instinct, reminds us of our sacred nature. To repress desire is to cut off our contact with the life force itself. But to indulge it without awareness is to drown in it. The alchemist, Jung said, must do neither. He must contain the fire, not snuff it out, not let it rage uncontrolled, but hold it in the crucible of consciousness until it transforms. That is the hardest part of all, because holding it means confronting everything it brings up, our loneliness, our fear of intimacy, our hunger for validation, our childhood wound. It means seeing how easily lust becomes a mask for longing, and longing becomes a substitute for love. And it means recognizing that sometimes, the person who awakens our deepest desire is not meant to be possessed. They are meant to awaken something within us. As Jung wrote, The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The goal is not to control the reaction, it is to endure it consciously. So, when lust turns dark, do not curse it. Study it. Trace its root. Ask what it is trying to reveal. Because in the alchemy of the soul, even the blackest lead contains gold. Segment 3, The Transformation. Turning desire into spiritual power. Once desire has been acknowledged and wrestled with, Jung says the true alchemy begins. The transformation of raw sexual energy into spiritual vitality. This was not suppression, nor indulgence, but transmutation. Just as the alchemist turns base metal into gold, the psyche can transform the base impulse of lust into creative, conscious energy, what Jung called libido in its highest form. To understand this, we have to go back to one of Jung's most important ideas. Psychic energy is not inherently good or bad. It is neutral, like electricity. Whether it gives life or destroys depends on how it's directed. Lust, therefore, is not something to kill or to drown in. It's something to work with. The erotic impulse is a sacred fire. It can burn down your inner house, or it can forge your soul into something radiant. This is why Jung often turned to alchemy as the grand metaphor for inner transformation. The alchemist never threw away lead. He heated it, purified it, and waited. Likewise, the spiritual seeker must stay with their desire, observe it without judgment, and learn from its imagery. When we repress desire, it goes underground, manifesting as obsession, guilt, or depression. When we indulge it blindly, it devours us. But when we confront it, when we neither flee nor feed it, we witness what Jung called the mystery of transformation. The same energy that once enslaved us begins to serve us. Let's bring this down from theory to lived experience. Imagine someone who feels a deep, recurring attraction toward unavailable people. Each encounter ends in pain, yet the pull repeats. From a Jungian lens, this pattern is not random, it's the psyche's way of saying, there is something in you still unconscious, still seeking completion. The energy of lust becomes a mirror, revealing unintegrated parts of ourselves. Once we face that truth, that what we desire is often what we've disowned, the attraction loses its compulsive power. What remains is pure energy, energy that can now be redirected into creation, purpose, even spiritual devotion. This redirection is not about celibacy or moral restraint. Jung was far from moralistic. Rather, he believed in sublimation, the process of transforming instinctual drives into creative expression. A poet writes instead of possessing, an artist paints instead of pursuing, a thinker turns passion into insight. Each act of creation becomes a way of honoring the same energy that once appeared as lust. In Jung's words, the libido is the energy of life itself. When we sublimate, we don't lose passion, we elevate it. What once fixated on one person or body becomes the fuel for meaning, beauty, and depth. The individual is no longer consumed by desire, they become its vessel. This is the true alchemy Jung hinted at, the uniting of eros, the principle of connection and passion, with logos, the principle of consciousness and understanding. The transformation also requires the presence of the self, Jung's concept of the total, divine center of the psyche. When the ego begins to serve the self rather than control it, desire finds its rightful place. It becomes the messenger of the soul, not its tyrant. The fire that once burned destructively now illuminates the inner world. In practical terms, this transformation shows up as a quiet power, a shift from craving to radiance. The individual no longer chases love to fill a void, they emanate it. They no longer cling to objects of desire, they recognize desire as a teacher. And as Jung would say, when we bring what is unconscious into consciousness, it ceases to control us. To turn desire into spiritual power is to understand that lust was never the enemy, unconsciousness was. The energy of eros has always been the same. What changes is our awareness. The moment we hold that awareness, with patience, humility, and courage, we turn the base metal of passion into the gold of soul. Part 4. The completion, when desire becomes light. Every alchemical process ends with what the ancients called the libido. The reddening, the moment when the work is complete and the philosopher's stone is born. It is the stage when spirit and matter are reconciled, when opposites no longer fight but dance. Jung believed that our relationship with desire follows the same path. It begins as chaos, burns through conflict, and ends, if we are brave enough, in illumination. Lust, in its most unconscious form, enslaves us. It's chaotic, reactive, and primitive. It wants to possess. But when it becomes conscious, when it's observed and honored rather than suppressed or indulged, it transforms into eros, not just sexual energy, but the principle of connection. Eros seeks to unite, to bridge gaps, to heal divisions, within ourselves and with others. This is why Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. He wasn't speaking only about romance, but about the profound alchemy that occurs whenever two psyches truly meet. Lust may bring two bodies together, but it is eros that allows two souls to recognize one another. When we reach this level of awareness, we realize that desire was never just about the other person, it was always a symbol. In Jungian psychology, every strong attraction or fixation is the psyche's way of projecting an inner image outward. The beloved becomes the screen onto which we project the disowned parts of our soul, the lost warmth, the courage, the beauty, the chaos we fear to own. That's why Jung often said that we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with our own unconscious contents mirrored through them. But as we evolve, something miraculous happens. The projection begins to dissolve. We start seeing the other person not as our missing piece, but as an equal soul walking their own path. What was once a mirror becomes a window, clear, open, sacred. The energy that once pulled us compulsively outward turns inward, filling our center with light. This is the moment when lust becomes love, and love becomes awareness. And with that awareness comes stillness, the quiet recognition that what we sought in the world was always a reflection of what already lived within us. The body's longing becomes the soul's remembrance. The ache of desire turns into the hum of presence. But Jung warned that this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires what he called the suffering of the soul. Not suffering in the masochistic sense, but in the alchemical sense. The willingness to endure the tension of opposites without escaping it. Between lust and repression, passion and detachment, indulgence and purity, lies a crucible, the psychic container where transformation happens. To stay in that fire, to neither run from desire nor drown in it, is the mark of the awakened individual. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability of the psyche to hold paradox until a higher truth emerges. The alchemist would have said, "Do not destroy the fire, learn to control its heat." When we do, something changes in our very being. We no longer desire from lack. We desire from fullness. The longing remains, but it's no longer desperation, it's devotion. The beloved becomes not an object to consume but a presence to revere. Sex itself, once driven by hunger, becomes a form of worship, a meeting of energies rather than egos. Jung's own writings were deeply influenced by the mystical traditions of the East, particularly Taoism and Tantra. Both saw sexual energy as sacred, not sinful. In Tantra, for example, the union of masculine and feminine is symbolic of the cosmic dance between Shiva, consciousness, and Shakti, energy. Jung recognized this archetypal truth, that within every psyche, there is a divine marriage waiting to happen, the union of our inner masculine and feminine, our logic and intuition, our control and surrender. To alchemize lust is to allow this inner wedding to take place. It's to stop seeking completion through another and start embodying wholeness within ourselves. Once this happens, even relationships change. They become less about filling wounds and more about celebrating shared consciousness. And yet, even at the highest level, desire doesn't vanish. Jung was very clear about this. To become enlightened does not mean to become sterile. The fire of Eros continues to burn, but now it burns clean. It becomes the warmth behind every creative act, every compassionate gesture, every moment of awe. This is the secret of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, uniting all your inner opposites into one radiant whole. Desire, then, was never the problem. It was the guide. It led you through shadow, through shame, through obsession, until you found the gold hidden beneath it, your own capacity for love, for creation, for transcendence. The very energy that once enslaved you becomes the force that frees you. In this sense, desire is a divine trick, a test designed by the soul. It lures you outward, only to turn you inward. It teaches you that the beauty you chase is the beauty you already contain. It teaches you that what you crave in another is really your own forgotten self, calling to be remembered. And when you finally see this, not intellectually but experientially, something incredible happens. The world itself becomes erotic. Not in the shallow, sensual sense, but in the sacred sense. Everything begins to pulse with life. A tree, a song, a stranger's eyes, all of it vibrates with the same current of Eros that once burned in your desire. You are no longer separate from the world. You are in love with existence itself. That is the ultimate alchemy of lust. It is not the killing of desire, nor its blind indulgence, but its illumination. It is realizing that the same fire that ignites the body also fuels the soul, and that to deny it is to deny life itself. As Jung wrote, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." To become whole, we must embrace both, the shadow and the light, the passion and the peace. The journey of transforming desire is not about escaping our humanity, but sanctifying it. It's about learning to live so fully that even our hungers become prayers. So the next time desire rises in you, don't rush to judge it or to act upon it. Sit with it, listen, ask it what it's trying to reveal. You might find that what you truly long for was never in another body, but in the depths of your own being. And if you stay with it long enough, patiently, reverently, you'll see that the same fire that once burned you was always meant to make you shine.